Hello, fiber friends. This is my top 5, maybe even top 3 favorite yarns that I have ever spun. Why do I love this yarn so much? Aside from the fact that it's purple, which is my favorite color, this merino silk blend has so much loft. I hope you can see how squishy it is. It is absolutely like holding a fluffy cloud. I spun this yarn using a supported spindle. Supported spindles are what we're going to talk about today. Basically, anything that is resting on something, on some sort of surface, while you spin, I think would qualify as what we call a supported spindle. We have a lot of different spindle shapes and styles. All of these different spindles are what I would consider supported spindles. On any spindle, we have a couple pieces of anatomy that we're going to need to talk about. We have the shaft, which is the stick that runs all the way through it. We have some kind of a disc, which is usually weighted, and that is what we call a whorl. They can be all different shapes, and they don't even have to be permanently attached to the spindle, or they could be even carved out of the shaft itself. So they can have different styles, but basically whatever the weight is that keeps that momentum of the spin going, that's the part that we're going to call the whorl. Here's another similar spindle, but even though these have a very similar shape and kind of style to them, you'll notice that the tips of these are a little bit different. One of them has a wooden tip, and one of them actually has a tiny little piece of metal in there, which makes for a smooth spin. You might want to choose your spinning bowls carefully. So I would choose a wooden one for my wooden tip, and I might choose maybe the metal or ceramic one for the metal tip. Let's see how they spin. Lovely, lovely. If you are spinning a top, for instance, and you just think about the physics of it, that is what will apply with supported spindles. So if you have a top that is heavy but very compact, it's going to spin very fast, but it won't spin as long. And if you have a top that is the exact same weight, but the weight is distributed into more of a disc shape, it's going to spin for a longer time, but maybe not quite as fast. So when you think about what type of thing you like to spin, think about if it's something that needs a lot of twist in it very quickly, or if it's something that you can let the twist build up into. If it's something you can let the twist build up into, then a slower, wider, longer spin might be good for you because that's going to build up. And if it's something that needs a lot of twist and that you're going to draft quickly, then a narrower spindle might be good for you because it's going to give you a lot of bursts of quick twist. This is one of the Crivelli spindles. I've been calling it Nutty because it is made from seasoned aged walnut wood, and I think that the whorl part of it looks a little bit like an acorn. So walnuts, acorns, let's get nutty with some alpaca. I don't need to have a huge amount of fiber in my hands. In fact, I find it easier to work with a little less fiber. I don't have to worry about it dangling or getting caught up in the twist. So I am taking a little bit of fluff off of here. We are wrapping the spindle in the same direction that we are turning it. And so instead of having a hook keeping this point, fixed right here, it's just going around and around with the spindle itself. So that is what's going on inside of my hand. It's just twirling around in there. All right, so I am going to get a little of this ready to draft. I've kind of folded it over because this is a little bit of a longer staple and I don't have both of my hands to stop and really fuss with it. I'm gonna have one hand over here and one hand controlling the fiber. For me, because I've had a lot of practice with this, I am going to move my hand up above the tip of the spindle so it can be turning and I can kind of move my hand up and carefully keep it supported that way as well. And that means that I can draft while the spindle continues spinning. So this is the goal that we would like to get to because it is very efficient to spin this way. But I'm gonna show you an easier way if you're just starting. So stick with me. Let's look at where we're going and then I'll show you how to get there, all right? So let's just do a little spin, a little nutty spin here. Just like that. And isn't that a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thread of alpaca? Sometimes I'll get a slub when I wind on. I'll just bring it in and do a little adjustment. And you can always do that. You can always just stop, put your spindle down, fix what you need to, and then continue spinning. I'll do another draft for you so you can watch. Just like that. How far out do I go with my draft? Well, that depends. Am I spinning in the car and I'm gonna, bonk Mark in the face with my handful of fiber? Then I'm not gonna reach that far. Is my shoulder tense, which lately it often is, and I'm wearing it like an earring? Well, I'm gonna adjust my posture and be aware of where my arm is and maybe not reach out as far. It's ergonomics, it's comfort, it's the space that you're in. If I was going to draft out a shorter distance, then, just draft out a shorter distance and wind it on. The distance that you draft out is not set in stone, and that's gonna very much just depend on the spinner themselves. How do I get to this point where I am able to spin and draft and maintain the spin all at the same time? Well, if you've spun with a drop spindle, you may have heard of something called park and draft, and we can do something very similar with a supported spindle. I'm going to put some twist into my working section of yarn here. Look at that. Now I have enough twist that I can draft out my fibers. Oh no, it's not drafting. I have too much twist right here and it's a little bit twist locked. That twist is like glue, we often say. It provides the friction to keep the fibers together. And we don't want friction if we are drafting those fibers apart. So what I'll do is I'll hold right here and untwist a little bit. I could even bring it in like this. And then I'm going to unroll it so that I can start pulling that fiber out of the fiber supply. And now if I let some of that out and give it some tension, it's going to move the twist that I built up all throughout this bit of yarn. As soon as I start to feel like I don't have enough twist, as soon as I start to feel like, oh no, it's going to slide and fall apart, then I know that that is the bare minimum amount of twist that I can have and still create a nice yarn. So I either need to wind it on at that point or give it a tiny bit more twist and then wind on. So I build up some twist and then I get that draft started, let it draft out. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I can give it a tug here and it still holds up. If I go a little farther, oop, I feel it starting to slide. It doesn't quite have enough twist to hold up under tension. So I'll give it just a flick more and then I can wind on. And then eventually you can kind of start to do it both at the same time. And all I'm doing to get there is let the tip of the spindle spin around inside of my hand, and I'm just moving my fingers up a little bit to hold the yarn right above the spindle. So I'll show you that again. I give it a flick and move my hand up to where I can pinch and draft against it, but then I open my hand to let that twist in there. If I'm not letting the twist in, it's not gonna hold up as yarn. It's just gonna start to pull apart and it'll just be a pile of fiber, right? So like that. Very efficient because I don't have to stop and start. The only thing really that slows me down is winding it on, but when I get into a good rhythm of it, I can practically, you know, draft, wind on, all together with very, very fluid movements. Next, I'm gonna spin a little bit with this spindle. This has been carded, which means that the short fibers in there are all sort of a consistent jumble. The alpaca I was using was combed top, which means the fibers were much more aligned, and I was spinning from the fold, but they were still very much aligned. Add some twist, draft it out, add some twist, draft it out. Make sure it's gonna hold up. Oh, it's close. Smidge more for security, and then wind it on there. So to start getting my hand into a position where I can draft and twirl it at the same time, I'm going to still continue doing my sort of park and draftish method here, but I'm going to give it a twist and then just kind of put my fingers up here. I'm not worrying about drafting. I'm giving it some twist, and I'm going to just kind of gently, I'm not choking off the twist, right? It's just very gentle, and I might just kind of open and close my fingers a little bit so that twist can get past them. And once I start doing that, then I'm going to start to get that muscle memory of giving it the twist it needs and then sliding up to draft against that sort of open and close pinch. If you don't want to constantly move your hand up to draft against pinching against your pinch, you can draft against the tip of the spindle as well. Let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to give it some twist, and then I'm going to pull back on the spindle, and that tension is what I'm going to use to draft out some fibers. Give it some twist and pull back against the spindle. Either way, I have to have something over here that I'm pulling against, whether I'm pulling against where I've pinched it off or pulling against the stick of the spindle itself. Either way, I need something to draft against. It feels like taking a walk through the woods rather than looking out the window of a car while you drive by. Somehow, that's what it feels like to me. I enjoy the slow mindfulness of a supported spin. Let's spin this rolag that I made off of a blending board with this glass tip spindle that has another rolag on it already that I also made off of a blending board. It just has the right level of twist and speed, and I like it for these rollags. Again, that's me, and so I don't want anyone to, you know, take it as a hard and fast rule that you can only spin, you know, blended rollags with a glass tipped spindle. That's not the case at all. That is just for the rhythm and type of yarn I like and the way I, you know, did these rollags. This is just what I like for that. But of course, I could spin these with any of the other spindles. It is just going to be a matter of amount of twist that I'm getting for the how fast I'm drafting and whether, you know, it continues spinning, whether I have to give it a lot of flicks to keep spinning. This one is going pretty fast, but it's also a little bit of a thicker yarn. And because it's so textured, I don't mind having slubs in it, so I'm not gonna stop and fix those. I'm just gonna keep on spinning. And we're back. It's dark outside now, so it's been a minute for me. But I am ready to take a couple things off of some spindles and show you how I do that. Here's what I spun today. I finished up the rolag that I was showing you earlier. So I'm gonna leave this as a singles yarn. I'll show you how I do that. And then I have this one. This is another one of the Crevelli spindles that, where is the base for it? I'm not sure what wool this is. This is some kind of mill ends or something. But this spindle was a beautiful spin. Here is the yarn I spun. It came out so beautifully. This was an absolute dream to spin. Sometimes those mill ends are amazing. I am not gonna ply on a supported spindle. That is not something that generally I like to do. It can be done. You would do it the same way that you hold the fiber, except you're holding the two strands that you're plying, and you would just twirl it the opposite direction. It's gotta be opposite to ply. But I find that kind of cumbersome and awkward. When I'm plying, I prefer to use a drop spindle. But either way, we have to get the yarn off the spindles, and that's what we're gonna do next. So there are some lazy Kates that you can find. I like to call them hardworking Kates, but if you're doing an internet search, you need to know that they're called lazy Kates generally. If you don't have one of those fancy hardworking Kates, you can make yourself one. It's not that hard. So this is a shoebox and it has holes poked in it. Here's a couple things I would recommend about the holes. First of all, make them higher up than you think, because the ones with the big whorls are gonna knock around on the bottom sooner than you think. The other thing I would recommend is making one side with the holes taller and one side with the holes lower, because then, right, and it's not gonna slide around as much. It's gonna have a little bit of its own weight holding it in there. That shoebox is a wide shoebox, so I use it for my taller spindles. These are just little gaskets. You can slide them down. It's gonna help keep it in the shoebox. So that is an excellent way to ply, and it works just fine. I also have these, and these are plying blocks. I think it's an applewood stump with the holes drilled in it. So these are very heavy, which is great because I can put it on the floor and I can scoot it together with my spindle in between, and it stays where I put it. And I love that. So this is what I'm gonna use right now because I find it personally very convenient. If you don't want to roll the, have the spindle kind of unroll the yarn off of it, you can pull it so that it's just kind of coming off the top. Whatever gets the yarn off the spindle so that you end up with the yarn that you want and you don't harm your spindle, or I guess anybody else, then that is what will work. Since I'm leaving this one as a single, I'm just gonna take it straight off with a niddy noddy. And since I want to ply this one, I am going to take it off with a nostepinne, or stick for wool, which is what nostepinne is. This yarn varies in diameter throughout, but overall it ended up being about 72 yards. That's approximately 72 meters as well. So that's pretty cool. The spindle is all cleaned off, and then here is my yarn on my little nostepinne. I'm really pleased with how this came out because it is so consistent all the way through, and I wanted that for this yarn. It's sitting very nicely in the 30 wraps per inch, maybe 25, 30. It fits in there nicely. A lovely lace weight. I have the starting and finishing end wrapping together. As I pull, it's gonna come one from the inside and one from the outside, and it will line up and ply very nicely. So I'm gonna go ply this real quick. I'm not gonna do that on camera. I'm gonna do it on my spinning wheel. Plenty of videos on my channel about plying with a spinning wheel if you want to check that out. I'll be right back and I'll show you how I'm going to finish this up. It's all plied and wrapped up on the niddy noddy. I counted 43 yards of 2-ply, which means that I spun 86 total yards on the spindle. I think there could have been room for more yarn on the spindle. And that leads to the question, how do you know your spindle is full? Well, one, it could be full if you have a YouTube tutorial to finish by the end of the day so that you can keep your upload schedule and you have enough to show what to do. But since that only pertains to a few of us, if you are having trouble keeping enough twist coming from the spindle, at a certain point it's going to get heavy and sluggish. It's going to make your fingers tired to give it enough flick, to get enough twist to keep drafting and keep your yarn going the way that you were. It'll get frustrating. You'll start to be like, oh, what is not working here? Well, the spindle, because it's full, and that's how you know. It's kind of by feel. You'll get to know your spindles, and you'll get to know, you know, oh, this spindle can hold this many ounces, and then it starts to get full and be done. So, yeah, the vibes. I put a lot of twist in this ply because I'm going to use this as weaving yarn, so it's very twisty, but it's going to relax once I get it wet and wash it. This is just a bowl of lukewarm water. I really like this stuff. It's called Soak. It's safe for wool and precious things. Put a little of that in there. You don't need to rinse it. It's biodegradable. It smells like wild mint. It's lovely. I'm gonna put it in the water, squeeze it, make sure that water gets all the way through there. Not being real rough with it. I might let it sit for a little bit, maybe 5-10 minutes if I want to. Next, I'm going to sort of squeeze the water out of it. This one I want to be lofty and I spun it woolen, so I'm gonna thwack it a couple times. Just like that. And that's actually gonna help it fluff up and bloom, and it'll be beautiful. This one, because I'm gonna use it for weaving, I'm not gonna smack it around. I'm not gonna thwack it. I am going to kind of snap it just like that. And as you can see, now that it's been washed and snapped, see? It is not as twisty as it was when we started finishing it. So that is nice. And if I want to speed up the drying process, then I can plop them into a salad spinner. So there's some water in there that isn't gonna have to evaporate out now. And here's my yarn, all finished. It just needs to dry. So it might still drip a little. I usually hang it in the shower. Where's the end? Also tie it in at least 3 places, because if you tie it in 2, part of it can fold over. You'll get confused, you'll have a mess. At least 3 places, trust me. I have experience. There they are, wet, but basically finished. Just have to wait for them to dry, and I'll show you what that looks like right now.